Has anybody ever heard of the honeybee waggle dance? I think it is a fascinating example of an impression of design in nature. You know, different types of bees have different purposes and different functions in their society. One particular kind is called a forager bee. And the forager bee goes out and scouts for honey. They'll go from site to site to site to site. When they return from their expedition, their scouting expedition, they return to the hive and they position themselves on the comb and they perform what is called a waggle dance. And they basically gyrate and move in a zigzag pattern, in a sort of a circular or a zigzag motion pattern. And there are two interesting things about this waggle dance. The orientation, where the dance is performed, the axis of the major axis about which the dance is performed, okay, is oriented at an angle to the sun that tells them the direction to the honey. So the orientation of their dance maneuver communicates the direction to the honey. And the duration of their dance, it's a circular kind of more of an elliptical type dance. And the long axis of the ellipse points in the right direction relative to the sun, that angle tells them the direction to go to. And the duration, the period of the dance is proportional to the distance to the honey. So this dance that these bees dance communicates two things: the direction to and the distance to the honey. And I've heard, I haven't done all the research, but I've heard there's another element of their dance that even speaks to the quality or quantity of the honey as well in that maneuver. So I find this to be very fascinating. Research has conclusively shown, that this is not a learned behavior. Now, the 1973 Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to the researcher who did the research on this honeybee waggle dance. And he conclusively showed that it is not a learned pattern, but it is a genetically acquired behavior. So that brings an interesting question. If this is a genetically acquired behavior, how is it acquired? How do they acquire the capability to do this? Because it is a coordinated, synergistic behavior. It's not just that the dance is done, but the interpretation of the dance has to be there as well. So whatever genetic mutations, genetic variations, whatever environmental factors, whatever variability and adaptability that had to be at play to bring about this functional capability had to develop in concert between the forager bees and the observing bees simultaneously. And I personally find that very fascinating. How did the correlation arise? The correlation between the orientation of the dance and the duration of the dance to the location and the distance to the honey. How did that naturally arise? How did this arise via natural processes? Well, I contend that communication, algorithms, information content, all of these things are products of intelligence, regardless of the means by which they're acquired. So I would point out to Dawkins then in conclusion that it is not enough to be able to craft a scenario by which environmental factors and genetic variability might account for selecting this feature. I would claim the mere existence of this social behavior speaks of design, whether it be through direct imposition of this instinctive behavior on the bee genome, or whether it be through the concurrent supervision of a sovereign intellectual designer who drove the development of the bees toward that end. Either way, I contend that this is a strong, strong impression of design that speaks loudly of an intelligent source. When I was in college, I can remember with a group of fellow engineering students, we would walk across the quad at the university, and we would go through this mini quad that was where the art schools were located. And it always amazed me walking through here, looking at all the projects that the art students would have on display out in the yard that they had done. And I'll never forget walking by one day and seeing a pile of dirt, a bunch of rocks, some yellow keep-out tape, and I honestly could not determine whether they were doing construction or whether that was somebody's art project. Because the projects ranged the full range, and it would not have surprised me if that were really an art project. So art is one of those things, like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder. Similarly, design is one of those things that is in the eye of the beholder. Design is one of those things that it's kind of like the Chief Justice or the Supreme Court Justice said, it's like pornography. It's like pornography. He said, I can't define it, but I can tell you when I see it. I would suggest that design should be extended to include laws and natural processes as well, particularly if one presupposes that the designer is a sovereign God. The designer is a sovereign God. And we know that that's the way God works. Sometimes God works in special fiat miraculous ways. And sometimes God works in and through the circumstances of our lives to accomplish His purposes and His will. But the point I'd like to make here regarding design, wrapping this up, is that design does not imply a method as much as design implies intent. Design is ultimately the work of God to intentionally create and implement a plan to accomplish His purpose. Now, what is an example of this design in nature? One in particular I'd like to talk about today is the honeybee Waggle Dance. Has anybody ever heard of the honeybee Waggle Dance? I think it is a fascinating example of an impression of design in nature. I hope you had a happy New Year. I hope everybody is having a happy New Year and a Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.